This class should be a refuah shlema, a complete healing for my grandmother, Sarah Esther Bat Minnie. If anybody can keep her in their prayers for Shabbat coming up, that would be great. For the women when you light, and for the men when you pray. So I'd really appreciate it. Baruch Hashem, we have one lesson before Shabbat. I was able to get up early enough to do this. And Bezrat Hashem, it should bring us to a good place going into Shabbat. So just as a recap, so far we've said that, by the way, can everybody hear me before I move on? Just want to make sure. Someone can give me like a thumbs up or one of these, a little text, something. Good. Okay. Thank you. So we said so far that the joy and the life force of a person, it comes from the Ruach HaChaim. It comes from the Ruach, the spirit, the energy of life. That energy of life is coming from the tzaddik. That there's this archetypal, all-encompassing soul in every generation that includes the souls of all of the Jewish people, and in some ways gives birth to them. And just like a mother is the source of life force for a child, so too spiritually the tzaddik is the life force for all the Jewish people of that door, of that generation. And Rabbi Nachman teaches that when our life force is hindered, when it's hard for us to breathe, or when we're breathing too quick, when we're going through difficulties and challenges in our life, and we feel that we have no chiyut, that we have no life force. So the way in which to draw back that life force in is to bring Ruach into that place, because all lacking comes from a lack of Ruach, Rabbi Nachman teaches. So one practical way to do this, which is very psychological, but obviously spiritual on a deeper level, is to breathe deeply. That by breathing deeply, specifically exhaling, you would think inhaling is the way to draw life force in, but it's actually exhaling. By the way, just a good meditation for people. I heard this from Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg. A meditation where you meditate on Hashem's name. We know that Hashem's name is Yud and a Hey, and a Vav and a Hey. So that's Gematria. Yud is 10, equals 10. And then Hey is 5. And a Vav is 6. And another Hey is 5. So Rav Ginsburg actually says this makes up a beautiful breathing meditation and technique called the Yud Ke Vav Ke breathing technique. And that is that you exhale for 10 seconds, which corresponds to the Yud of Hashem's name. You stop breathing for 5 seconds, you pause, then you inhale for 6 seconds, and then you pause again for 5 seconds. And you do this over and over and over again. I've done this many times for years. It's very, very therapeutic. I highly suggest that people try it out this Shabbat. And if you have a question about that, you can ask again at the end. But that's a beautiful technique. And again, that kind of goes to the fact that breathing is the source of life force. Because connected again to Yud Ke Vav Ke, you see that breathing is connected as well. We know that the neshama, which is the peace of God inside of us, comes from the word neshima, which means breath. So we see that really the extension of Hashem, the peace of godliness that's in each and every one of us, is in a very deep way our ruach, our breath. And this is the reason why when Moshe Rabbeinu was going to leave his position and Hashem was taking him away from being the first leader of Klal Yisrael, and that Yoshua ben Nun would take his place to bring them into the land of Israel, he said that he's a man, he's an ish, that he has ruach. Now on paper, what's the big deal? Rashi explains that ruach means that he understood the nature of every Jew, that he understood what he was, who he was, and he could speak to them each on their own level. Now, on a deep level, what's the reason? Because he's their ruach, because he actually on a deep level is the root of their ruach, the root of their life force. So when a Jew makes a krech from difficulties, from challenges, from obstacles, from hindrances, struggles, pain, and a person and a Jew specifically just exhales like that. So he actually draws himself greater ruach, greater ruchniut, greater spirituality, greater godliness into that place specifically that's lacking. But that's all when you're connected to the tzaddik of the generation. And the reason why the tzaddik of the generation is able to do that is because the tzaddik is always hovering over the water. Like the pasuk says that the ruach of Elokim marchefet al pnei hamayim, that even though the world was tov vohu in the beginning, the world was darkness and chaos, which is symbolic and emblematic of our personal lives and struggles, especially now. So don't lose faith, because the ruach of Elokim, the spirit of godliness, is hovering over the water. And the Chazal and the sages teach that there is no water besides the Torah. So what does it mean that this Ruach of Elokim is hovering over the water? It means that the Ruach of the Tzaddik is hovering over the Torah. Because the Ruach of the Tzaddik is hovering over the Torah constantly, there's no reason to go into Yeush, there's no reason to go into despair, because he's connected, he's attached at the hip to the source of all life force, because we know that the Torah existed for thousands of years before the world was created. It is the blueprint for creation. And by the tzaddik always being attached to the Torah, he's attached to the source of all life force, to the creator, to the nursling of all of existence. And as a result of that, when we are connected to him, we receive all of our life force. This is connected to David HaMelech, how he would wake up in the middle of the night. He had the Torah, meaning the 5 strings of the harp that were above his bed. And Rabbi Nachman says the secret of this is corresponding to the 5 books of the Torah. And because he had this harp over his bed, the Ruach Sefonit, the northern wind, would come in and blow it. And the northern wind, Rabbi Nachman says, comes from the word tzafum, which means hidden, meaning the Ruach inside a Jew's heart. That Ruach was playing in that harp, and it played the 5 strings of the Torah. And that's the reason why he was able to be so matzliach and so successful. And that's the reason as well, Rabbi Nachman teaches, why David knew when it was nighttime, even though Moshe didn't. It said that Moshe knew it was like nighttime, it was like midnight, but David knew exactly when it was midnight every time. What was one of the differences? So one of the big differences is that when Moshe was alive, the Torah hadn't been given yet. Now, obviously, he's the harbinger of the Torah. He's the source of the Torah. He's our teacher of the Torah. But because David actually had it in his pocket, so as a result of that, he had one advantage, that the Torah was already given. Because of that, he knew when it was nighttime, and he knew how to fill in the lackings of the nighttime. And then when he woke up, his soldiers and those people who worked for him, they would come in and say, the Jewish people need your help. And he was able to assess and to help every situation, all because he was drawing from the water. He was drawing from the Torah. And as a result of that, he was the Ruach of Elokim that's hovering over the water. Now, we know, though, that there's a principle from Shlomo Melech in Kohelet and in Mishlei that Hashem created one opposite the other. Meaning to say that in every aspect of good, you always have the opposite. So too when it comes to holiness, to Kedusha. The more Kedusha, the more godliness there is in a place, the more there is the opposite. That's why in the land of Israel, there's so much struggle and difficulty. There's so much what appears to be the opposite of what we learn about in the Torah, that spirit, that Ruach Elokim, that we're all searching and yearning for. And at the same time, we know it's here in a more palpable way. So how do we explain that? And at the same time, the Gemara says, no, that whoever has a greater soul than his friend, he should know that his Yetzer Hara is going to be greater than his friends. Why is it that his negative inclination is going to be greater than his friends if his soul is greater? Because everything needs to be corresponding. You need to have one opposite the other. So too within yourself, in order to have Bechira, Rabbi Nachman teaches, you must have that your capacity for destruction and for negativity is as great as the potential of your soul to express itself in this world. That's why we see many times that the greatest souls struggle in the deepest way. Part of the reason is because you need free will. If you didn't have those struggles, those great souls would just flourish, and then you wouldn't have free will. So too, opposite the tzaddik of the generation, the Ruach of Elokim that's hovering over the water, you have the Ruach Sarah. You have this wind that's like a tornado. You have this wind that causes suffering, the suffering spirit. And that's that of Esav, Yaakov's brother. That Esav represents that spirit in the world which disconnects you from the tzaddik, which hates Yaakov, just like Esav hated his brother, which despises spirituality and yearns only to increase ego and self. This is all the concept of Esav. And within a person, it's not just his ego that is the Ruach of Esav inside of him, it's also his taivot, his desire for physicality that goes beyond and above what a person physically needs, that he's trying to derive spirit and life force from the physical world beyond its limits, overeating, over drinking, over satiating in physical pleasure, sexual pleasure. All of these things are corresponding to Esav, not when they're done properly. The Torah is a very big fan, a very big proponent of a person enjoying everything in this physical world. And the sexual act is one in which the Torah speaks about as being the highest spiritual act that there is. So the Torah is not one of chastisement. It's not one of separation from the physical world. It's one of using the physical world properly, the way that Hashem created it at the highest level. You know, there's optimal ways to use your phone. There's optimal ways to use your computer. There's optimal ways to use technology. And then there's ways that you go over the bandwidth, right? You go over the limit. So if you go under the bandwidth, then you have it at the right speed. It's moving high paced. It's moving fast. It's beneficial. It's helpful. So that's the physical world when you use it as a vehicle for expressing godliness, spirituality. That is always within measure and limit. But when a person goes over that and he's trying to derive his life force from the physical world itself, I want to have my joy, my simcha from drinking. I want to have my simcha from partying. I want to have my simcha from sex. I want to have my simcha, my joy from pornography. I want to have my joy from food and drink alone. So ultimately, if a person tries to do this, he will find that he struggles and that he ends up feeling emptier after. It's almost like a cup that the more that you place in it, the more it feels empty, the more it takes to fill it. It's just like when you take drugs and you hit a certain limit, and then you have to continue to take more and more of it to have that same type of effect. So really, spiritually, everything in the physical world works like that. And that's why in the Western world, in America, where we have never had greater technological advancements, we've never had easier access to the physical world on every level, that you can literally just go down the street and get anything you want, food, drink, anything. You can go on the computer and see anything that you want to see. So that sounds amazing. That sounds beautiful. That sounds messianic. But on the other hand, you never had higher rates of depression and anxiety, confusion. And the reason is because it's excessive. And Rabbi Nachman teaches in Likutey Moharan later something very insightful, very, very deep, that the cause of all sadness is excess. I thought the cause of sadness was genetic predispositions. I thought the cause of sadness was the lack of a fulfilling life. I thought the cause of sadness was stress. So all of those things are true, but they're not the root, they're branches. The root, Rabbi Nachman says, is excess, and specifically excess of the physical world. And obviously excess of thought, meaning that I'm thinking deeper beyond what I need to. For instance, just as an example, let's say, for instance, I'm struggling to find work. So all I really need to know is that Hashem is the cause of me struggling to find work, right? But if I start to internalize the fact that I can't find work, and I start to beat myself up, oh, you're such a loser, what's wrong with you? Why can't you do this? Why can't you ever succeed? Why are you struggling? Why don't you know who you are? And then it starts to devolve into so many things. Why? Because of an excess of thought. And that comes from a belief that I control my life. But when a person releases that, which is the most cathartic, most therapeutic experience and the most genuine experience, and only thinks to himself what Rabbi Nachman says, that of a simple Jew, which is that the reason why I'm struggling to find work is because Hashem wants me to. Why does he want me to? Only Hashem knows. So what do I need to do to find out? Let me go talk to him. Maybe I'll find out things within myself, why Hashem would want me to. Maybe it's because I haven't talked to Hashem in my life. Maybe it's because I'm not close to Hashem. Maybe it's because I'm living traditionally and I'm not truly living a spiritual life. Maybe I have black and white and a hat and a beard, but I don't actually have a real connection to Hashem. I don't feel that he's close to me. So why would Hashem make me struggle in my life? So that I can talk to him. Because Rabbi Nachman says, how are you going to be close to someone you don't speak to? You want to be closer to Hashem, talk to him. So, and obviously Rabbi Nachman also teaches in the Likutey Moharan that a Jew experiences Ruach HaKodesh, which is a very deep thing, that he experiences a very, very deep reservoir of truth within him when he speaks to Hashem from the bottom of his heart in Hibodedut. And if he continues to work at it and to persevere with it, he will get answers to his problems very often. I've experienced this many times in my life, deep answers that you didn't think of, and it comes to you and it hits you like very strongly. And this is the Ruach of Kedusha that is in every single Jew that you experience when you talk to Hashem in your Hibodedut. But this concept of Esav is the biggest barrier and obstacle to finding and connecting to the tzaddik. He's the force in your life which tells you you don't need to connect to a true tzaddik. He's the force in your life that tells you don't need to listen to the advice of a true tzaddik. He is the voice inside of you that says that Hashem is not real, that spirituality is not real. He's the voice inside of you that makes you feel bad about yourself. He's the voice inside of you who takes away all of your hope and creates Yehush. So whether it's within you or it's external, that is the force of Esav. And this is the source of judgment and din in the world. And this is the fight that every Jew has. You know, there was Abraham, there was Yitzchak and Yaakov. Why was Yaakov called the choice of the three avot? Why was Yaakov, so to speak, considered the most elite of the three fathers, even though he's really the receiver, the recipient of everything that his father and grandfather did? And all of his children turned out perfect. So in a paradoxical way, it was because he suffered so much in his life. That Rav Yitzchak Ginsburg explains it was because he had a twin brother who hated him, who was constantly after him, which is reflective of the Yetzer Hara of every Jew. Because we are born and we experience the side of us that's so dark, that's steeped in physicality and excess, and it's constantly haunting us. And because we fight it, we're considered choice. And that's our greatness, that's our specialty, that's our sweetness in the end. And that's why it says that the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, is actually, when Hashem created it, he said it was Tov, it was good. And also he's called an angel. Why is he called an angel? Because in reality, this counterforce is very good, because the Jewish people are called an olive, specifically the oil in the olive. But you cannot get the oil in the olive unless you squeeze the olive. And that is the whole aspect of Esav. It's to bring out the best of Yaakov, to bring out the best of the Jew. And it was only because of this malach that's called Esav, this force that's called Esav, that Yaakov ultimately transcended his limited nature and became Yisrael, which is the highest level of consciousness. It's the highest spiritual madrega. It's the purpose for which every single Jewish man and woman was created, with that we should be able to attain this level, to be above the Malachim, to be above Esav, to go from Yaakov, who's the despised member of the family of society, who struggles on a daily level, on a deeper way than even the rest of the world, and yet he perseveres and he never gives up, and he ultimately overcomes his enemy and becomes Yisrael. That he goes from Ekev, Yaakov, the heel, to Yisrael, Roshli, a head. That he goes from the despised figure to being the cornerstone, like we say in Hallel. So this is all the Chazara, this is all the recap of what we've done so far. Now we're going to move forward. And Rabbi Nachman's going to say like this: what is it that the tzaddik does for us? That when we exhale and we breathe in, so to speak, the ruach of the energy, the life force of our root neshama of the tzaddik Yisod Olam. So what is it about him, or what happens in that process that causes to fill our lackings? So Rabbi Nachman says like this: Va'alken ve'ish HaChaim yichap reina. There's a pasuk in Mishlei that Shlomo Melech says that the wise man is going to pacify it. Meaning that what is the essence of what's called a Talmid Chacham? Usually when people think of a Talmid Chacham or a Torah scholar, we think of somebody who learns all day, he's in Kollel, He learned Torah even though he's an adult. He's supported for it, X, Y, and Z. He's very familiar with poskim, with the halachot, with Jewish law. He's very familiar with Shas, with the oral Torah. However, Rabbi Nachman says that's not the essence of a Talmid Chacham. A real Chacham at the deepest level is one that he is yechaprena, meaning to say that he causes atonement, and literally chaper means to cover over or to fill that which is lacking, meaning that the real essence of a wise person, of a chacham, is he's able to fill and to remove people's lackings. This is the reason why people go to visit tzaddikim for blessings. This is the reason why attachment to a tzaddik causes so much good in your life, is because the tzaddik himself removes the lackings of his students. He removes the lackings of those who are attached to him. Ki achisaron hu mechamat avonot. Because lackings come from when we act not in the way and the dictates of the Torah. This is a very difficult topic for me. I know that this is very commonplace to speak about in Torah classes. This is something that I've struggled with ever since becoming Baal Tshuva. I'm just being open about it. The concept of a vera, the concept of a sin, the concept of doing something which goes against the dictates of the Torah, of Hashem's Ratzon. So, growing up, I grew up very liberal, and there's not much boundaries, or there's no boundaries. In the Torah, there's very clear boundaries. And from Chazal, it's also very clear that when we cross those boundaries, we cause damage. We cause societal damage. We cause internal damage. We cause physical damage. We cause spiritual damage. And the reason it works like this is because every single one of us is connected like a ray of a sun to the sun itself. We're all sons of Hashem. We're all daughters of Hashem. We're all literally connected to Hashem at the deepest level. And it's taught by all the Hasidic masters, the Kabbalists, all of the Chazal, that when a Jew does an avera, when a Jew does a sin, he disconnects himself from his life source. He disconnects himself from its root. Now, why would anybody do it then? If the effect is so damaging, and if we could realize that and recognize it, we would never do it. So then why do we do it? So the Torah teaches because we have a Ruach shtut, that in those moments that we do the avera, either it comes from a lack of knowledge, we don't know enough, or it comes from the fact that in that moment we feel overpowered. We don't feel capable of overcoming the challenge. And that is coming from the Ruach shtut. It's coming from the Ruach of Esav. That's coming inside of us. That's what causes the chisronot. That's what causes the lackings. Like it says in Masechet Shabbat, like Rav Shalom Arush brings in all of his books constantly. This is in Nun Hey. Ein mita below chet. There's no such thing as death without chet, without sin. Yisurim below avon. And there is no such thing as suffering without doing an avera. Okay. Now, before a person makes the leap and thinks to himself, so does that mean that I'm not healthy because I've done something wrong? Does that mean that I'm struggling financially because I've done something wrong? Does that mean whatever, If a person can only struggle if there's first some type of disconnect from Hashem, some type of breach of the dictates of the Torah, is it because I'm breaching those dictates that I'm struggling, or the people around me are struggling? So it could be, but it's also very possible, and like Rabbi Nachman teaches elsewhere, that we are, so to speak, experiencing the effect either of the collective whole of the Jewish people in this area and our spiritual standing, or also from previous generations. Like we say in Tikkun Chatzot, that we are, so to speak, holding, we're sovel, we are holding the weight of the errors of our fathers. There's also, Rabbi Nachman teaches that there's a soul in the generation who is a tremendously suffering soul. And because of his suffering, or her suffering, all novelties and revelations of godliness of Torah that come into the world are coming about through her suffering. So it doesn't appear to be from that Torah that she is the cause of her suffering, but it's actually the fact, because she goes through that, it's able to draw down revelations of godliness. So there's many reasons why a person could suffer. A person comes into the world. Yes, it's connected to Mashiach ben Yosef as well. There's also Gilgulim. People come down into this world many, many times. There's such a thing that's called soul transmigration. Buddhism didn't make it up. It's clear, it's from the Torah. It's the gift that Abraham gave to Yitzchak and to the the children of the East. This concept of transmigration. And it's a real thing. And if you're living and you're watching this class, you've probably been here many times before. So there's many, many reasons why a person goes through what they go through. But at the root of it, we know that Adam HaRishon, the first man, he caused an error. He made an error. And as a result of that, death came into the world, sickness came into the world, struggle came into the world, struggle to make money came into the world. All of those things were not built into the creation. They only came from a breach of life force. So it's very connected to the Torah that we're learning from. So even if we're only struggling on account of Adam HaRishon, so still it doesn't neglect this chok, or this rule, this yesod, that all suffering in the world, it comes from some type of breach of the dictates of the Torah, whether it's in the past, whether it's in the present, whether it's for the collective Jewish people, whether it's because of the individual. That I am going to cause consequences for people that they transgress, and I'm going to bring down magefas, diseases or plagues into the world because of Avera. So now what is the role of the tzaddik? Therefore the tzaddik, the tzaddik draws the ruach of life, and he draws it into the lacking of every single Jew. And because the tzaddik is, so to speak, above this level, that he no longer does averot, he doesn't do things which breaches the dictates of the Torah, because he's so connected to the Torah. He has such foundation in the Torah. He never leaves Hashem, so to speak. So as a result of that, his wholeness is what fills our lackings. He mechaper havon. He then fills in those places that are lacking due to the errors that we have made or that the Jewish people have made. This stems from the tremendous compassion and empathy of Hashem Yiparach. So this is a very deep point. What is this Ruach Chaim? What is this spirit of life force that the tzaddik holds, because he does not mitigate that life force because of his very high level of spirituality and action? So if you look at Hashem's name, you can actually think of it like a breath or like a life force. That the life force begins as a primordial point in the Yud of Hashem's name. And then it, so to speak, enters into a space, a vacated space, that's the Hey of Hashem's name. And then it retracts from that space. And then it turns into a Vav, which is an elongated breath. And it goes down deep into that space. And then the Hey again as it fills that space. So what is it that the tzaddik is holding on to? He's holding on to literally godliness. He's holding on to the Ruach Chaim, the Ruach of life that existed before the Chet of Adam HaRishon. He is drawing in the Vav of Hashem's name into himself. He's drawing the Ruach of Hashem into his neshama. And as a result of that, when we are connected to him and we krechs over our lackings, these things that we struggle with, that we have not been able to overcome, whether they are spiritual or physical, whether b'shogeg, by accident or on purpose, whatever it is, and we krechs. So as a result of that, Rabbi Nachman says, you draw that pure, clean Ruach of the tzaddik into yourself, and you fill that which is lacking. This is the great kindness of Hashem, that he caused the tzaddikim to be the holders of this Ruach Chaim. Shem yekablu Ruach Chaim et Torah. And where are they getting this Ruach Chaim from? They're getting it from the Torah itself. So is it coming from Hashem or is it coming from the Torah? So it's taught in the Zohar that Hashem and the Torah are one. And the Rambam says, how is Hashem, so to speak, different than us? because we have wisdom, and Hashem, the Rambam says, is his wisdom. So this is a very deep thing to contemplate. But on a simple level, that is to say that Hashem is not separate from what he knows. He is what he knows, meaning that the Torah and Hashem are one completely. So when you learn the Torah, the Tanya says that you have the greatest amount of devekut to Hashem, the greatest amount of closeness to Hashem, because Hashem is the Torah itself. So when you're learning the Torah like we're doing right now, we are literally attached to Hashem Yiparach. And that's why when a person is attached to the Torah, nothing bad can happen, not to himself and not to the Jewish people. This is a very famous yesod of Chazal, that the learning of Torah holds up all of Klal Yisrael. What's the reason? Because the Ruach HaChaim of the Jewish people. There's a famous story I heard from Moshe Feinstein. I read it actually, or maybe I heard it. A beautiful story. They came to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. They told him, Rabbi, there was an accident and a Jew got hurt. What happened to him? Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said. He said that he died in a car accident. So, gosh, he's Jewish, yeah. He said, what time did he pass away in the car accident? What time did the accident happen? So he said, I don't know, let me find out. He found out for him. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said, no, he wasn't Jewish. He said, no, for sure he was. I know he was. There was this accident and it happened. Everybody knows, it's confirmed. We all know about it. He said, I promise you that a Jew did not pass away at the time. Nothing bad happened then. So he was shocked. He went back to confirm, and he found out in the end, this person was not Jewish. And he couldn't believe it. He went back to Rav Feinstein. This was not thousands of years ago. This was literally, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And he said to Rav Feinstein, how did you know? So he said, because the time that you told me that this person got into the accident, I was learning Torah at the time. And nothing bad ever happens to a Jew at the time that I'm learning Torah. Why? Because the Ruach HaChaim is coming from the Torah. And when the tzaddikim are immersed in it, that protects the Jewish people, that fills the holes and the lackings of Klal Yisrael. V'hem mamshichin Ruach HaChaim hel chesronot uvazeh mechaprin avonot. And when we draw down this Chaim, we draw down this life force, it draws the life force towards the lackings, and in this we mechaper all that which is lacking. So Rav Nachman says like this now. We know that every day we speak out the 13 attributes of Rachamim. We know this was the greatest revelation of godliness that ever took place to an individual. When Moshe Rabbeinu was revealed to him that Hashem had these 13 aspects of Rachamim, that we know that they're derived according to Kabbalah from the Keter, which is the highest madrega, the highest revelation of godliness. And we say, Hashem, Hashem, El Rachum V'chanun Erech Apayim. Erech Apayim, which means he's patient. But we learned in this Torah that Erech Apayim literally means extension of breath. He's long-breathed, or he's patient. He has extended breathing. Hu bechinat haruach. It's the concept of ruach. Shu marich ruchei. That is Hashem extending his own breath for the Jew. That's why, because when do we say the 13 attributes of Rachamim? We got them when the Jewish people sinned with the golden calf. That's when we got these 13 attributes. So obviously they're coming to fill in the lackings that come from Avera. Now, what is the yesod of this? That Hashem is Erech Apayim. So we see even here that it's the extended breath of Hashem, of the tzaddikim that's rooted in the Torah, which is one with Hashem. That is what draws in this Ruach HaChaim into that hole, that lacking in each and every one of us. Bechinat anacha el chisaron. And this is all, so to speak, this is replayed every single time that we krechs, we sigh over our lackings. We are, so to speak, breathing in that Erech Apayim of Hashem into that place that we're lacking. And that's why the very next part of the 13 attributes says, Rav Chesed ve'emet, that Hashem has tremendous love and tremendous truth. However, Rabbi Nachman, again, like he touches up before, this concept of Rav, he now says not Rav Chesed, that Hashem is full of love, but Rav Chesed, that it's the rabbi of Chesed, that it's speaking about the tzaddik, that the tzaddik is the Rav Chesed. He is the master of love. Kamosh Amanu, like we said before, Shema Kablina Ruach HaChaim at tzaddik Rav the Kedusha, because all of that Ruach HaChaim, all of that spirit of Hashem, which is drawn into the Jew, and it fills in that place that he's lacking, which comes from the Kedusha of the Rav, that's because the Rav himself is called the Rav Chesed. He's called the Rav of Chesed. He draws down Chasadim, he draws down kindness and love of Hashem into the place that's lacking, and love destroys all darkness. Shehu Rav Chesed, he's the Rav Chesed. Hefech Esav Rav the Klipa. This is the opposite of the Rav the Klipa. That's Esav. He's the opposite of the source of impurity. Shehu Hadmoni, that is said about Esav that he's red. Why is he red? Because head is Tokef Hadin. Red in Kabbalah expresses judgment. So as opposed to the one who is drawing judgment and negativity into our personal lives and into the world, this tzaddik, this Rav Chesed, is drawing mitigation of that suffering. He is filling in those lackings. Emet, and that's why it says the next part, the emet, because a tzaddik mekabel ruach hayim Torah. Because where is the Rav Chesed? Where is the tzaddik drawing this Chesed from? He's drawing it from the Torah itself, the emet. Shenikra, like the pasuk says in Malachi, Torah emet hayata befihu. The Torah of truth that was in his mouth. The essence of the Torah itself is emet, is truth. And the Rav Chesed is drawing Chesed from that emet, from that truth. There's a famous story, that Rav Natan, and he was speaking with Rabbi Nachman, and he was saying, oh my gosh, our generation is so begama Brit. That was in the 1800s. You can't even imagine what it is now. How are we ever going to overcome this? How are we ever going to cling to Hashem and connect to Hashem and to elevate ourselves in this area when we're struggling so much? So he said, and you don't think that learning Torah can fix that? Do you not realize that Tiferet, which is one of the 10 Sfirot, is higher than Yesod? Yesod is the Brit. It is the source of the Brit. It's the source of Yesod. It's the source of the Ruach HaChaim, of the Tzaddik, that comes from the Torah itself. So he was intimating that by learning Torah over time, you automatically draw that Ruach HaChaim into yourself. And specifically, B'dafka being attached to the Tzaddik of the generation, so you are getting the greatest influx of the Ruach of Chaim of the Torah. And that's why the next part of the 13 attributes says, he protects, he keeps in mind the chesed for thousands of generations. This creates the principle of the Torah that when a Jew does something that's not good, Hashem, so to speak, holds it in accounting for a little bit. But when a Jew does a good thing, when he does a mitzvah, when he does a kind deed, when he learns Torah, Hashem counts that for him and for his generations for 1,000 generations. It comes from this part in the 13 attributes of Rachamim. La'alafim. Zebechinat alufei Esav. So now Rabbi Nachman, again, he's going to touch it up differently, and he's going to explain not that it's for thousands of generations, but it's referring to that Notzer Chesed, it protects the Chesed la'alafim, to the alufei Esav. He protects the Chesed of Hashem for the Jewish people against the counterforce of these leaders of Esav, Rav Ravei Esav, Shem Rav the Klipa, this force of impurity which is drawn down into the world, which is causing our suffering, which is causing our challenges in life. That's a Noser Chesed. Sheh Chesed, Bechinat Rav the Kedusha. This is expressed by the Rav of Kedusha. Notzer Mamtich, that he protects and he sweetens Bechinat Alufei Esav, the concept of Esav. Rav Ravei Esav. Ba'alken, and therefore no se'avon fesha. And that's why the end of the 13 attributes says, no se'avon fesha. It clears away. It's an atonement and a forgiving of all mistakes and errors that we make, all breaches of the Torah that we engage in. That's the end of the 13 attributes. So now we have a beautiful exposition of these 13 attributes. They're not, so to speak, up in the air. We don't understand them anymore. Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun. He is empathetic and he is compassionate. He's kind. Where do we see that? We see that in Rav Chesed, that the Rav Chesed is the tzaddik. It's all channeled through the tzaddik of the generation. Why the tzaddik of the generation? Ve'emet, because he's hovering over the water. And then what ends up happening from that? Notzer chesed la'alafim. He is sweetening the judgments, the alafim, those proponents of Esav that draw down negativity in the world. He's notzer chesed. He is protecting and he's sweetening the kindness for us. And then noser avon v'fesha. He is then absolving us of all the errors that we make. Because through this Ruach HaChaim, shleimut chisaron, there is a filling and there is a wholeness which comes in the place of all lack. It's drawn to the tzaddik through his sighing, and through this nichap krim avanot. It is filling the lacking that comes from all of our breaches in the Torah. And that's why he said it's called a wise person, HaChaim, that he allows us to atone. Rabbi Nachman explains elsewhere and earlier in Likutey Moharan that the concept of a chacham, chokhmah, it comes from ayin, it comes from nothingness. Meaning, where does the tzaddik get this ability, so to speak, to be immersed in the Torah to such a degree and to be able to absolve the errors of the Jewish people? It comes from his humility. Because of his humility, his attachment to ayin, to feeling that he's nothing, not coming from lack of security, not coming from issues with sense of self, but because he has so nullified his ego. So as a result of that, he's able to be Mesirat Nefesh for the Torah. And as a result of that, draw that Ruach of the Torah into himself. That also gets your prayers answered as well. That's why Rabbi Nachman says that when a Jew struggles to get his prayers answered, he should learn more Torah. So now we're learning another extension of that. Why does that help? Because it draws the Ruach of HaChaim. It draws that Ruach of life. So this is the lesson for today. Be'ezrat Hashem, next week, we're going to discuss a very important concept, very briefly, discussing the 4 elements of creation, those 4 elements as they are drawn down from the 4 letters of Hashem's name. It's a very interesting topic, how that relates to us personally. And this goes to, so to speak, why it is that a Jew struggles in certain ways, and what it is that the tzaddik was able to accomplish to overcome these struggles, and why it is that he's able to sweeten the judgments that come from Esav, and why we are not able to. And in fact, Rabbi Nachman is going to say there that when we try to, so to speak, lift up and to help to elevate darkness before we've actually elevated ourselves completely from that place, we actually are very vulnerable to the darkness itself, and it draws us into it. This is why many times you see Bali Tshuva, that after they become Bali Tshuva, they start to try and tell their family and their friends about everything. And because of their family and friends' lack of belief in what they're speaking about, they end up becoming defensive. They end up, so to speak, losing their simcha, their joy. All of that's coming from the fact that they're drawing in this ruach of tuma, and they are not able to combat it because they themselves are vulnerable to it. So B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to learn about it next week. That's a very important lesson. And this is why you often see many teachers of Torah, they suffer tremendously because it actually comes from their students. They're not able, so to speak, to overcome the maladies that come from their students. And as a result of that, they draw them into themselves, but it still provides the Ruach HaChaim for those students themselves. Does anybody have any questions from today's lesson or anything at all before Shabbat? You can answer the questions on the bottom. While you guys are thinking of your questions, there was a question, is this Mashiach ben Yosef that we're speaking about? So yes, there is 2 concepts of Mashiach. There's Mashiach ben Yosef, there's Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Yosef is the predecessor to Mashiach ben David. He's the first Mashiach. And it's clear from Chazal, from the oral Torah, and for sure from the Hasidic masters and Mekubalim, that this Mashiach ben Yosef, part of the way that he achieves tikkun, rectification for the Jewish people, he does that by, so to speak, bearing the bearing the lackings of all the Jewish people, specifically in their breaches of the Torah. And as a result of that, he's called the suffering servant. This is the source for where the concept of Yeshka in Christianity, that there is, so to speak, a messianic figure that suffers for the klal. The reason that they have such a thing is because it's a real thing. It's just not Yeshka. According to the Arizal, it's Moshe Rabbeinu himself. He comes down in every generation and he suffers for the Jewish people. This connects very much to what Rashi says about why he was anav ma'od, why he was very humble. He says because he is sovel for the Jewish people, he holds and he carries the weight of all Klal Yisrael, which we're seeing that there's no greater weight than the suffering that comes from our breaches of the Torah. So this is all comes from the Mashiach ben Yosef. He's here to, so to speak, fix and rectify that which Adam Rishon made an error in. And this brings Mashiach ben David. He is the Mashiach who brings light and joy. He's the Mashiach that is the king of the Jewish people. He's the Mashiach who's the, so to speak, the final redeemer of Klal Yisrael. But he's only able to bring that revelation of Amunah to the world only after Mashiach ben Yosef comes and, so to speak, bears this difficulty and this challenge.
Rabbi Kalmus.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was thinking like the chisaron, like the lacking, would relate to Nekudas Tovos. Like Nekuda Tova would be that we have a Ruach HaChaim and we're connecting to Rabbi Nachman's teachings. Would that be like in line with what you're saying? With
Samuel, where are you from? Where are you from?
Dallas, Texas. Dallas, Texas.
How did you find these classes?
I've been studying Breslov for like 15 years.
Wow.
But I and you were on there and I heard you and him talking, and that's how I found you.
Wow. Okay. Shmuel, I think you go by. Very nice.
No, I go by Sam.
Sam. Okay, Sam.
Yeah.
Sam, it's very nice to meet you. It's exciting to have a student in Texas.
Yes.
I hope you're enjoying the classes, and
yes,
it's a privilege and it's humbling to have a Jewish neshama down in Texas.
Thank you.
So I think that's a great point. That's a beautiful point. So Sam is bringing up the concept of Nekudas Tovot. For anybody who doesn't know, one of the biggest principles of Breslov Chassidut from Rabbi Nachman is always looking at one's good points. And by looking at one's good points, it changes the way that Hashem looks at you. That instead of judging yourself unfavorably, you actually judge yourself favorably. That instead of after making an error, you beat yourself up. Rabbi Nachman teaches something unbelievable, that if you judge yourself favorably, and you say, you know what, you did the best that you could do, and I'm going to try to do better next time. And you say, and you look at all your good points, then actually Hashem judges you that way as well, which is a very beautiful thing and something that you wouldn't think on your own. So now we're getting another extension of that. Sam is saying maybe this is connected to the Ruach HaChaim, that when I think about my Nekudas Tovos, I am thinking about the good point in the lacking. That's the Ruach HaChaim, and then that fills the lacking itself. So I think it's for sure connected. It's the tzaddik himself that's able to bring out all those Nekudas Tovos and to mitigate all of those lackings. And so we get to see how to look fondly upon ourselves from the tzaddik. So it's a beautiful point, and it's a great connection between different Torahs. So you're for sure a good student of Rabbi Nachman. You should continue, and hopefully we'll see you more in the classes. And if you have any friends from Texas, especially ones with cowboy hats, that would add a lot to the Tzion family. So that'd be great.
I try to register for your fundraiser, like to call people, but I'll talk about it later. Okay. Signing out to volunteer. So. Okay,
great. Thank you so much, Sam. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
There's a question here on the bottom. Todah Rabbi for tonight's shore for the meditation on Hashem's name. Right. I have heard that one should also picture each letter as H, fire, not just as black letters on a page. Is that as important as the breathing, the exhalation, retention, breath, and retention for 10, 5, 6, and 5 seconds? That's another good facet. I mean, obviously with meditation, there's always ways to increase and to amplify and to, um, augment your meditation. And that's a famous meditation to picture the letters of Hashem's name, that they're like in fire. Because we know that Hashem says, my Torah, my word is fire. So for sure, that would be a good thing to do. This specific meditation is focused on the breathing aspect. Once you get the breathing going and you're able, so to speak, to get that rhythm of 10, 5, 6, 5, 10, 5, 6, 5, and you feel connected and you don't have to pay attention to it, then for sure I would try to picture Hashem's name in fire. That's a beautiful meditation. So thank you for that. Any final questions before we head off, or any final statements before we head into Shabbat? Okay. Again, I just want to make an announcement for anybody who's on here. Bezrat Hashem, we're going to have our first fundraiser at the end of the month. If you guys like these classes, you want to keep them going, you want to do even more, we have big plans. I hope, Bezrat Hashem, that we're able to start doing trips to Uman every Rosh Hashanah for Tzion. I even would love to subsidize those trips for some of the younger people, or people who have money, financial issues and aren't able to. Younger guys, this is life-changing stuff for a lot of people. If we could get them to Uman, you could change their whole life. So that's something I would love to do. We also want to write a book. All of these things, though, are determined on the success of the fundraiser, that we have Yishuv Dat, that I don't have to go around collecting and asking people for money. So if you can please sign up for the fundraiser at the end of the month, all you have to do is make phone calls to friends and family. You don't have to say anything that's not true. Tell them how meaningful and how transformative these teachings have been for you, what Sion has done for you. If you have resonated and if it has had as big of an impact on the students as I've gotten the feedback that it has. So it shouldn't be so hard to explain to people why this is important, especially in our generation and especially right now, so that we can give more Torah classes, so that we can write books, so that we can add more programming. We have an idea from one of our students to have like a Big Brother program, which is a beautiful idea. For that as well, we need funds. So exciting things, amazing things. But Rabbi Nachman says, for the greatest revelation of Torah, you need the greatest revelation of wealth. So we don't have any right now. So that's why we're having a fundraiser. So Bezrat Hashem, with your help, if you can go to that link that Ben Weinberg, our COO, sent out to all the groups, sign up, take a little bit of time to make a few phone calls on the day of the fundraiser, that would be something unbelievable. It's a huge merit. It's the highest level of tzedakah. Hashem should bless each and every one of you, that you should have an amazing, amazing, amazing Shabbat. I just moved into my apartment, thank God. So this is my first class from our apartment. I'm very excited to be in Ramat Beit Shemesh. I hope to do a class here at some point as well in Yerushalayim. I would love to do a class maybe by the Kotel. That would be amazing. So just keep praying for me, keep praying for Tzion, keep working to achieve more spiritually and growing. You guys are doing amazing. I'm very, very proud of all of you. And this is the biggest chut in my life and biggest privilege is to be able to teach you. And I just want to thank all you guys so much for listening to me. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.